Potatoes, carrots, onions, yeah, you know these. But what if I told you that some of the most powerful civilizations in human history were built on root crops you've probably never even heard of? We're talking about underground empires here, folks. Crops were so important that entire cultures rose and fell based on whether they could grow them successfully. Number 10. Cassava. Let's start with cassava, also known as yucca or manioc, because this root crop is currently feeding over 800 million people worldwide, and you probably don't even know it exists. This thing looks like a giant, hairy sweet potato that's been hitting the gym, and it's basically the ultimate survival food. Cassava originated in South America and was so important to indigenous civilizations that they built entire agricultural systems around it. The Amazonian peoples didn't just eat it, they turned it into flour, bread, alcohol, and even used it as a base for fermented drinks that could knock you flat on your back. Here's what makes cassava absolutely incredible. It can grow in the worst soil imaginable. We're talking about dirt so poor that nothing else will survive, and cassava just shrugs and keeps growing. Drought? No problem. Floods? It handles those too. This root crop is basically the honey badger of the plant world. It just doesn't care about your environmental challenges. The only catch is that raw cassava can literally kill you. It contains cyanogenic glycosides, which sounds fancy, but basically means poison that will ruin your day. Traditional societies figured out elaborate processing methods to make it safe, involving soaking, grinding, and cooking in specific ways. It's like nature's way of saying, yes, I'll feed your entire civilization, but you have to work for it. Number 9. Taro. Next up is taro, and if you think you haven't heard of this one, think again. Ever had poi in Hawaii? That's taro. Those purple chips you see at fancy restaurants? Also taro. This root crop has been feeding Pacific Island civilizations for over 1,000 years, and it's the reason Polynesian navigators could island hop across the entire Pacific Ocean. Taro looks like a hairy coconut crossed with a turnip, and it grows in the most ingenious way possible, in flooded fields called paddies. The ancient Hawaiians created elaborate irrigation systems to grow taro that were so sophisticated, they're still being studied by modern engineers. We're talking about agricultural technology that was perfected when Europe was still figuring out how to make decent bread. The root itself is incredibly nutritious, packed with complex carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. But here's the weird part. Like cassava, raw taro can irritate your throat and mouth due to calcium oxalate crystals. It's like the plant kingdom has a thing for making their most nutritious foods slightly dangerous. Traditional preparation involves extensive cooking, which breaks down the crystals and makes it safe to eat. What makes taro truly empire-worthy is its cultural significance. In Hawaiian culture, taro isn't just food, it's the older brother of humanity itself, according to traditional creation stories. This root crop was so central to Pacific Island civilizations that they developed hundreds of varieties, each adapted to specific growing conditions and uses. Number 8. Jerusalem artichoke. The Jerusalem artichoke has the most misleading name in the vegetable kingdom. It's not from Jerusalem, it's not an artichoke, and it's actually a type of sunflower root. This thing is like the fruit that shall not be named of the root vegetable world. Confusing, misunderstood, and way more important than anyone realizes. This knobby, weird-looking tuber was a staple food for Native American tribes across North America for centuries, before Europeans showed up and completely missed the point. While the colonists were struggling to grow European crops in American soil, indigenous peoples were thriving on Jerusalem artichokes that grew wild and stored perfectly through harsh winters. The French figured it out eventually and started calling it topinambour, turning it into a gourmet ingredient that fed them through famines and wars. During World War II, when food was scarce, Jerusalem artichokes became so important in France that they're still associated with wartime survival cooking. Here's what makes this root crop special. It's loaded with inulin, a type of fiber that feeds the good bacteria in your gut. It's basically a prebiotic superfood that was keeping people healthy centuries before anyone knew what gut bacteria was. The only downside is that if you're not used to eating it, Jerusalem artichokes can cause some serious digestive fireworks. Let's just say there's a reason some people call them farty chokes. Number 7. Sweet potato. Sweet potatoes might seem basic, but these orange powerhouses literally saved civilizations. The Inca built an empire in the Andes partly because they figured out how to grow sweet potatoes at altitudes where other crops failed. We're talking about food production at 12,000 feet above sea level, where the air is so thin you can barely breathe, let alone farm. But the real sweet potato empire story happened in China. When sweet potatoes were introduced from the Americas in the 16th century, they revolutionized Chinese agriculture. This crop could grow in marginal lands that couldn't support rice or wheat, effectively expanding China's agricultural capacity by millions of acres overnight. The result was a population boom that changed world history. China's population doubled, then tripled, partly because sweet potatoes allowed them to feed people in regions that were previously considered unsuitable for agriculture. We're talking about a root crop that literally enabled one of the largest demographic shifts in human history. Sweet potatoes are also ridiculously nutritious. One medium sweet potato contains enough vitamin A to meet your daily needs, plus fiber, potassium, and complex carbohydrates that provide steady energy. It's like nature designed the perfect survival food and then made it taste like candy. Number 6. Yam. True yams, not the orange things Americans call yams at Thanksgiving, are massive underground tubers that can weigh up to 150 pounds. We're talking about single roots that are bigger than most dogs, and they've been feeding West African empires for thousands of years. The Yoruba civilization in what's now Nigeria built complex agricultural systems around yam cultivation that were so sophisticated, they influenced social structure, religious practices, and even their calendar. The Yam Harvest Festival was the most important celebration of the year, marking not just agricultural success, but the renewal of community bonds and spiritual connections. What makes yams empire-worthy is their incredible storage capacity. A properly cured yam can last for months without refrigeration, providing consistent nutrition through dry seasons and difficult times. This allowed West African societies to build large, stable populations and develop complex trade networks. When enslaved Africans were brought to the Americas, they carried yam cultivation knowledge with them, introducing these crops to new environments and helping sustain communities under the most difficult circumstances. The cultural and nutritional importance of yams transcended continents, showing how deeply connected food and identity really are. Number 5. Turnip. Turnips might seem boring, but these humble roots literally kept European civilizations alive through the Dark Ages. When grains failed and harvests were poor, turnips were the backup plan that prevented mass starvation. They were so important that turning to turnips became a euphemism for surviving hard times. The agricultural revolution in Northern Europe was partly built on turnip cultivation. These roots could grow in cold, wet conditions where other crops failed, and they could be stored through long winters. More importantly, turnip greens provided essential vitamins during months when fresh vegetables were impossible to find. Scottish Highlanders survived on turnips and oats for centuries, developing a cuisine and culture around these humble ingredients. The Irish relied on turnips as a backup when potato crops failed, though unfortunately not extensively enough to prevent the Great Famine. Turnips were the insurance policy that kept entire populations fed when everything else went wrong. Modern agriculture has largely forgotten about turnips, but they're actually incredibly nutritious and environmentally friendly. They grow quickly, improve soil health, and can be eaten raw or cooked. It's like we abandoned one of our most reliable food sources just because it wasn't glamorous enough. Number 4. Radish. Radishes were so important to ancient Egyptian civilization that workers building the pyramids were paid partly in radishes, along with garlic and onions. We're talking about a root crop so valuable that it was literally currency for one of history's greatest construction projects. Ancient Greeks and Romans were obsessed with radishes, developing dozens of varieties and using them for everything from food to medicine to religious ceremonies. Large radishes were so prized that they were made from gold as offerings to the gods, while lesser vegetables got silver or lead replicas. That's some serious root vegetable worship right there. What made radishes empire-worthy was their speed and reliability. Most varieties can be harvested in just 30 days, providing quick nutrition when other crops were still growing. They could be planted multiple times per season, giving farmers multiple harvests and insurance against crop failures. Radishes also have natural antimicrobial properties and were used medicinally long before anyone understood why they worked. Ancient civilizations weren't just eating them for nutrition. They were using them as natural antibiotics and digestive aids. It's like they accidentally discovered pharmaceutical compounds centuries before chemistry was even invented. Number 3. Beet. Sugar beets literally broke Napoleon's empire and changed the course of European history. When the British blockaded French ports during the Napoleonic Wars, cutting off sugar imports from the Caribbean, Napoleon ordered massive beet cultivation to produce sugar domestically. This wasn't just about sweetening coffee. Sugar was a strategic resource essential for preserving food and maintaining army rations. The crash program to develop sugar beet production led to major advances in agricultural science and industrial processing. French scientists figured out how to extract sugar efficiently from beets, creating an entire industry that eventually challenged the Caribbean sugar trade and reduced dependence on slave labor. But beets were feeding empires long before Napoleon's sugar crisis. Ancient Romans cultivated beets extensively, and the crop was so important to Germanic tribes that they developed elaborate fermentation techniques to preserve them through winters. Pickled beets became a staple that provided essential nutrients during the coldest months. Red beets are packed with nitrates, which improve blood flow and athletic performance. Ancient warriors might not have understood the biochemistry, but they definitely knew that beet-eating soldiers had more endurance and strength. It's like they accidentally discovered natural performance enhancement centuries before sports science existed. Number 2. Parsnip. Before potatoes arrived from the Americas, parsnips were Europe's main starchy root vegetable. These pale, carrot-shaped roots were so central to medieval European cuisine that they were mentioned in agricultural laws and monastery records as essential crops for survival. Parsnips have an advantage that most root crops don't. They actually get sweeter after being exposed to frost. This means they could be left in the ground through winter and harvested fresh, well, when other stored foods were running low. Medieval farmers called this nature's cold storage, and it allowed communities to have fresh vegetables even in the depths of winter. The sugar content of parsnips was so significant that they were used to make wine, beer, and other fermented beverages before hops became standard. Parsnip wine was a common drink in medieval Europe, providing both nutrition and alcohol when grapes couldn't be grown reliably. What's fascinating is that parsnips completely disappeared from most cuisines once potatoes became popular. It's like Europe collectively forgot about a root crop that had sustained them for centuries, all because something new and exotic showed up. Parsnips are actually more nutritious than potatoes in several ways, but they became victims of agricultural fashion. Number 1. Potato. And finally, we have the ultimate empire-building root crop, the potato. This humble tuber from the Andes literally changed world history, enabling population booms, industrial revolutions, and massive migrations that shaped the modern world. The Inca built their entire civilization around potato cultivation, developing thousands of varieties adapted to different altitudes and climates in the Andes Mountains. They created sophisticated agricultural terraces and storage systems that allowed them to feed millions of people in some of the world's most challenging growing conditions. When potatoes reached Europe in the 16th century, they initially faced resistance because people thought they were poisonous or caused diseases. But once Europeans figured out how to grow them properly, potatoes revolutionized agriculture and demographics across the continent. Ireland's population doubled in the century after potatoes became a staple crop, showing just how much nutrition could be produced per acre compared to grains. The problem was that this dependence on a single crop made entire populations vulnerable when disease struck, leading to the devastating Irish potato famine. But here's the thing about potatoes. They're actually one of the most complete foods on Earth. You can survive on potatoes and milk alone for extended periods, getting almost all the nutrients your body needs. They're incredibly efficient to grow, producing more calories per acre than almost any other crop. The potato enabled the Industrial Revolution by providing cheap, nutritious food for growing urban populations. Without potatoes, the demographic and economic changes that created the modern world might never have happened. We're talking about a root crop that literally made industrialization possible. These ancient roots didn't just feed empires, they built them. And in today's world of climate change and food insecurity, they might just save us again. Cassava, sweet potatoes, Jerusalem artichokes, they're more than humble crops. They're powerful, resilient solutions growing right under our feet. History already gave us the answers. We just have to dig them up.